Inside ADX Florence, America's most secure prison. There is a prison in the United States designed not to rehabilitate, not to reform, but to contain. A place built to hold the inmates considered too dangerous, too disruptive, or too influential for any other prison in the federal system. It is officially called the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility. Most people know it by another name. ADX Florence. The prison built for control. ADX Florence is located outside the small town of Florence, Colorado. From the outside, it appears stark and unremarkable, low-slung concrete buildings set against an empty landscape. But behind those walls is what federal officials have described as the most secure prison in the United States. It is the final stop in the federal prison system. There is nowhere else to send an inmate once they arrive here. ADX Florence is operated by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the agency responsible for all federal correctional facilities. Unlike maximum security prisons that still allow group movement and limited social interaction, ADX Florence was designed around one central principle: absolute control. The Bureau of Prisons has stated that the facility exists to house inmates who pose a unique threat to the safety of staff, other prisoners, or the public. Many inmates are transferred there after committing acts of extreme violence or persistent disruption inside other prisons. The prison opened in 1994, following a series of violent incidents across the federal prison system in the late 1980s and early 1990s. At the time, federal officials acknowledged a growing problem: certain inmates were able to exert influence, order assaults, or orchestrate criminal activity even while incarcerated. ADX Florence was built as the solution. According to public records, its design was informed by earlier high-security units but pushed isolation further than any previous federal facility. Construction took place in a remote area deliberately chosen for its isolation. Florence, Colorado, sits more than 100 miles south of Denver. The surrounding terrain is flat, open, and unforgiving, conditions that reduce the risk of escape and limit outside access. Federal officials have never publicly disclosed the full construction cost of ADX Florence. Estimates reported by news outlets in the 1990s ranged from approximately $60 million to over $100 million, though exact figures remain unclear in public documentation. From the moment it opened, ADX Florence was different. Unlike other prisons where inmates move through shared hallways, most prisoners at ADX spend the majority of their time alone. Cells were designed to minimize sound, visual contact, and physical interaction. Even communication between adjacent cells is limited by thick concrete walls and reinforced doors. According to court filings and Bureau of Prisons descriptions, this level of isolation is intentional, not punitive in name, but preventive in function. The facility quickly gained a reputation that extended far beyond Colorado. Journalists, attorneys, and human rights observers began referring to it as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The nickname was never officially adopted, but it persisted, reflecting both the prison's security level and its remoteness. Unlike Alcatraz, however, ADX Florence is not a relic of the past. It is fully operational today. Before we go any further, if you value deeply researched, fully factual documentaries like this one, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video. Subscribe to Beyond the Bars. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories, accurately, responsibly, and in depth. Inside the architecture of isolation. To understand ADX Florence, you must first understand its design. This prison was not adapted from an older structure. It was purpose-built from the ground up to enforce isolation, control movement, and reduce human contact to the absolute minimum deemed operationally necessary by federal officials. Every wall, every door, every angle serves a purpose. The cell. Each inmate at ADX Florence is housed in a single-person cell. These cells measure approximately 7 feet by 12 feet, roughly the size of a large bathroom. The walls are made of poured concrete, reinforced to prevent tampering. The door is solid steel, fitted with a narrow window that allows staff to observe the inmate without opening the door. Inside the cell is a concrete bed, a concrete desk, and a concrete stool, each fixed to the floor. The mattress is thin. Personal property is strictly limited and varies depending on an inmate's classification level. The toilet and sink are combined into a single stainless steel fixture. Water flow is controlled externally by staff. The shower is not inside the cell. Instead, inmates are escorted to individual shower stalls several times per week. According to Bureau of Prisons policy, all movement outside the cell, showers, recreation, medical visits, is conducted under escort and restraint. One of the most discussed features of the ADX cell is the window. Rather than a traditional side window, most cells contain a narrow skylight angled toward the sky. Federal officials have stated that this design allows inmates to distinguish day from night while preventing any view of the surrounding landscape. Former inmates and attorneys have described the skylight as disorienting. The Bureau of Prisons has not publicly commented on psychological effects, stating only that the design meets constitutional standards. Daily life. Inmates at ADX Florence spend approximately 22 to 23 hours per day inside their cells. Meals are delivered through a narrow slot in the door. There is no communal dining. The Bureau of Prisons has stated that inmates receive nutritionally adequate meals equivalent to those served throughout the federal system. Menus are standardized and subject to federal guidelines. Recreation is conducted alone. Inmates are escorted to individual outdoor enclosures, sometimes referred to as recreation pens, where they may walk, exercise, or sit under open sky. These enclosures are surrounded by high concrete walls designed to prevent visual contact with other inmates. Recreation typically lasts 1 hour per day, 5 days per week, though schedules can vary based on security status. ADX Florence is heavily monitored. Cameras cover nearly every corridor and movement area. In addition, staff conduct frequent checks, both visual and electronic. According to court records, inmates are observed at regular intervals to ensure safety and compliance. The Bureau of Prisons does not publicly disclose exact monitoring protocols for security reasons. Communication and contact. Contact with the outside world is severely restricted. Most inmates at ADX Florence are permitted limited phone calls and non-contact visits, typically conducted through thick glass barriers. All communication is monitored and recorded, subject to legal exceptions for attorney-client privilege. Mail is screened, and in some cases, restricted under special administrative measures, commonly known as SAMs, authorized by the U.S. Department of Justice. Under SAMs, inmates may face further limitations on correspondence, visitation, and media contact. These measures are typically imposed on individuals convicted of terrorism-related offenses or those deemed capable of directing violence from prison. The DOJ has stated that SAMs are reviewed regularly, though critics argue the review process lacks transparency. Staff and security. Correctional officers at ADX Florence undergo specialized training. Staffing levels are higher than at most federal prisons, and movement is choreographed with precision. Officers carry restraints at all times, and use of force incidents are documented and reviewed under Bureau of Prisons policy. Public data on incident frequency at ADX Florence is limited, though court records indicate fewer inmate-on-inmate assaults than at other high-security facilities, an outcome federal officials attribute to isolation. The control room is the nerve center of the facility. From here, doors are remotely operated, movement is tracked, and alerts are monitored. The system is designed to reduce unpredictability and eliminate spontaneous interactions. According to federal officials, the goal is not punishment, but management, keeping inmates, staff, and the public safe. A prison within a prison. Within ADX Florence exists an even more restrictive area known as the control unit. Inmates assigned to the control unit experience the highest level of isolation in the federal system. Placement is based on behavior, security concerns, or national security considerations. Assignment decisions are reviewed internally, but much of the process remains classified or undisclosed due to security policies. Inmates can spend years, or decades, at ADX Florence. While the Bureau of Prisons maintains that the facility includes a step-down program allowing inmates to earn reduced restrictions, former inmates and advocates have disputed how accessible or effective that process is. Court rulings have generally upheld the constitutionality of ADX Florence, though some cases have resulted in settlements or policy adjustments. ADX Florence is not designed for everyone. It is designed for those the federal system believes it cannot safely manage anywhere else. Who goes to ADX Florence, and why? ADX Florence was not built to house the average federal inmate. It exists for a narrow category of prisoners. Those the federal system has determined cannot be safely managed anywhere else. This determination is not based solely on the crime of conviction. It also considers conduct inside prison, escape risk, and the perceived ability to influence or direct violence beyond prison walls. Placement decisions are made by the Federal Bureau of Prisons through a multi-level administrative process. The specific criteria are outlined in internal policies, portions of which are not publicly disclosed for security reasons. The path to ADX. Most inmates do not arrive at ADX Florence directly from a courtroom. Instead, many are transferred there after years in other federal prisons, often following violent assaults on staff or inmates, escape attempts, or sustained leadership roles in criminal organizations. In some cases, inmates are transferred due to national security concerns, including terrorism-related convictions or intelligence assessments that suggest ongoing risk. According to federal court records, inmates are notified of their placement and may submit written objections, but the final decision rests with Bureau of Prisons officials. Once an inmate arrives at ADX Florence, the move is rarely temporary. Transfers out of the facility are possible but uncommon. The Bureau of Prisons maintains that inmates can progress through a step-down program that gradually reduces isolation. Critics argue that progression is slow, opaque, and inconsistently applied. Both claims are supported by different sets of court filings and testimonies. Terrorism-related inmates. ADX Florence is perhaps best known for housing individuals convicted of terrorism-related offenses. One of the most prominent was Ted Kaczynski, known publicly as the Unabomber. Convicted in 1998 of a nationwide bombing campaign that killed 3 people and injured dozens, Kaczynski was housed at ADX Florence for years under highly restrictive conditions. In 2021, he was transferred to a federal medical facility due to declining health. His placement at ADX was confirmed through court filings and Bureau of Prisons records. Another was Zacarias Moussaoui, the only person convicted in U.S. court for crimes related to the September 11 attacks. Moussaoui was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and transferred to ADX Florence due to concerns about his behavior and influence. Court filings describe repeated disciplinary issues and communication restrictions imposed under special administrative measures. Richard Reed, who attempted to detonate explosives aboard a commercial flight in 2001, has also been housed at ADX Florence. Reed received multiple life sentences and was placed under SAMs, severely limiting his contact with the outside world. The DOJ has publicly stated that such restrictions are intended to prevent radicalization or coordination with extremist networks. Organized crime and cartel leaders. ADX Florence also houses high-ranking figures from organized crime and international drug trafficking organizations. Among them is Joaquin Guzman, widely known as El Chapo. Guzman was extradited from Mexico to the United States, convicted in federal court in 2019, and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. Following his sentencing, Guzman was transferred to ADX Florence. Federal prosecutors cited his history of prison escapes and continued influence over cartel operations as justification for his placement. Other inmates have included leaders of domestic extremist groups, high-level gang organizers, and individuals convicted of espionage. While the Bureau of Prisons does not release a complete roster of ADX inmates, names have emerged through court cases, media reporting, and attorney disclosures. Notably, not all inmates are held under identical conditions. Restrictions vary based on classification level, disciplinary history, and the presence of special administrative measures. Violence inside prison walls. Some inmates arrive at ADX Florence because of what they did after being incarcerated. Federal records show that inmates transferred to ADX have been involved in murders, attempted murders, or coordinated assaults within other prisons. In several documented cases, inmates were accused of ordering attacks while housed in high-security facilities. ADX Florence was designed to sever those command structures. The Bureau of Prisons has argued in court that isolating these individuals reduces violence across the entire federal system. Critics counter that extreme isolation creates long-term psychological harm and may violate constitutional protections. Federal courts have repeatedly examined these claims. While some lawsuits have led to changes in mental health screening and review procedures, courts have generally upheld the legality of ADX Florence's core operations. A small population, a large shadow. ADX Florence houses a relatively small number of inmates. Typically fewer than 400, according to publicly available estimates. Yet its influence extends far beyond its population size. It represents the outer boundary of federal incarceration, the point where security concerns outweigh nearly every other consideration. Controversy, legacy, and the limits of control. ADX Florence is one of the most litigated prisons in the United States. For decades, inmates and advocacy groups have challenged its use of prolonged isolation, arguing that near-total sensory deprivation can cause severe psychological harm. Symptoms described in court filings include anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. Mental health experts have testified that extended solitary confinement can worsen existing psychiatric conditions. The Bureau of Prisons has acknowledged these concerns but maintains that ADX Florence provides constitutionally adequate mental health care and regular evaluations. Federal courts have largely upheld the legality of ADX Florence, ruling that its conditions, while severe, do not automatically violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. However, some lawsuits have resulted in changes. These include improved mental health screening, periodic placement reviews, and clearer pathways within the step-down program for inmates to reduce isolation over time. Still, critics argue those pathways remain difficult to access and inconsistently applied. What ADX Florence ultimately represents is not just a prison, but a line. A line the federal system draws when it believes control is at risk of being lost. Supporters argue it has prevented violence and saved lives. Opponents argue the human cost is too high. Both claims are documented. Both remain unresolved. Final thoughts. ADX Florence was built to contain the most dangerous inmates in America. But its existence raises a deeper question, one that has yet to be fully answered. How far can a system go in the name of security before it begins to lose sight of humanity? That question is still being debated, in courtrooms, in academic studies, and behind the concrete walls of this prison. If you value factual, in-depth stories from inside the criminal justice system, support Beyond the Bars by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling these stories, accurately, responsibly, and without exaggeration. Thank you for watching.